these streets. I don't really care how you live in LC. I do me, player, please. You don't know about me, you know I run these streets. You don't know about me, you know I run these streets. Down the boy, down the boy. Down the boy, down the boy. Down the boy, down the boy. Down the boy, down the boy.
Good evening, bona nit, buonasera, buenas tardes. Welcome everybody at our special event with Bruno Giussani. My name is Pedro Ralda, and on behalf of CASA SEAT, I would like to welcome you and thank for your presence online and offline. Tonight, Gina Tost was supposed to be the moderator of this session. However, I would like to apologize her because this morning she had some health problems and she had to cancel at the last minute. Gina, una abrazada y cuidad molt. Tonight, I will have the difficult task to replace her, and I will ask you to be patient with me. Let me introduce Bruno Giussani, who is already with us online. As you can see, organizing events are quite challenging these times, and I want to congratulate CASA SEAT, who is one of the few places in Barcelona who is still programming despite the COVID constraints. So, who is Bruno? Bruno Giussani is a global curator of TED, the organization behind the TED conferences and the popular online TED Talks. Since joining TED in 2005, Bruno has curated hundreds of TED Talks with scientists, designers, economists, artists, politicians, athletes, thinkers, and including the Pope Francisco. Not bad. Before joining TED, because Bruno was also alive before TED, he was internet columnist for New York Times. He was working at the World Economic Forum with me, as he was the head of online strategy, and he has been Knight Fellow at the University of Stanford in the USA. Bruno is also a journalist. He's written a lot of articles for media in Switzerland and abroad, and he has co-founded 3 internet companies and advised several non-profit initiatives. For example, he's chairing the Geneva International Film Festival on Human Rights. But for me, which is the most important of Bruno, that Bruno is a Ticinese, which means that he's coming from the Italian area of Switzerland. So it means that Bruno is a true European citizen, even if Switzerland doesn't belong to the European Union, because he's living in the heart of Europe and he's speaking fluently English, French, Italian, German, and a little bit of Spanish. So Bruno, welcome and good evening, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Hola Pedro, solo un poquito. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. So, as you may know, last Saturday it was International Day of the Radio. And for this reason, CASA SEAT has decided to dedicate the month of February about listening. And tonight, we will interview Bruno Giussani in order to discuss about listening to today to imagine tomorrow. The idea is to have with you, and also with the people following us on streaming, a 360-degree conversation about politics, economy, technology, COVID, and so on. Dear Bruno, I would like to ask you to start our conversation to explain to the audience what is TED and what does it mean to be a curator of ideas, a field that you are so passionate.
Thank you, Pedro. Well, TED is a non-profit organization active internationally, and the goal is to disseminate knowledge and ideas as widely as possible. It's a sort of educational initiative in a way, and we do that mostly via video. In normal times, in non-COVID times, we film those videos at a conference, at a gathering, with a speaker on stage telling a story to the audience, and then we distribute them over several online platforms to literally billions of people. Now, curation. We live in a time of proliferation of information, of ideas, of content, how we have come to call it with generic terms. And that, of course, calls for efforts in filtering, in synthesizing, in contextualizing, creating connections between seemingly unconnected pieces of information. And that's what curation does. It tries to create frameworks and filters to better understand reality in an era of overproduction of information and of limited attention.
Great. So I guess that everybody knew what's TED, but I wanted to give you the platform to explain if somebody was not sure. In any case, I was talking about, I believe a lot about geopolitics. So that's why I want to ask you, I mentioned before that you live in Switzerland, which is a country of the political neutrality and the high mountains. So do you think that living in Switzerland, it gives you a perfect observatory to listen better and to understand better the new trends tomorrow's world?
Listen, Switzerland is certainly a good place from where to observe the world right now. It's a small country, it's a very globalized country, it's very open to international influences, it's turned towards innovation and education. But I could say the same things about Barcelona, really, which is also a good place from where to observe the world and imagine and dream up the future. To me, the most important part is the future is not a place that's just there and we walk into as if we were walking into a room that's already set and designed, right? The future doesn't exist until we create it in a way. And in front of us, there are so many potential different futures. Now, that doesn't mean that some elements of tomorrow are not already here today. They are in labs, they are in daily lives, they are in the way we deal with technology and we relate with technology and many other things. And all those pieces will participate in create the future that we are going to choose, but that depends on our choices as individuals and as society. And of course, technology plays a big role here, right? You talked about paradigms before. There is a shift in a paradigm that I think is really important. We used to think of the future by trying to imagine what we would do tomorrow and the day after tomorrow and over the long term. And now we often think of the future in terms of what technology is going to do to us tomorrow. Enable surveillance, reduce our privacy, automate our jobs, steal our jobs, and so on. And I think that shift is really interesting in the way we think about the future now.
Okay, and one country which is important because in terms of the future of the planet, it depends a lot, is about the USA. And USA in January, we had a lot of events. There was the end of Trump's presidency and a new administration coming. And there is this Capitol uprising. So my question is, how did you analyze the last week of Trump presidency and how it affects the social media and the democracy in the USA and the rest of the world?
Yeah, this question of Twitter and Facebook kind of deplatforming, taking away their platform from Donald Trump for inciting the riots on the 6th of January at the Capitol is actually very interesting. First of all, I think it's important to say that just the fact that Donald Trump has not been tweeting for about a month has made the world a much calmer place, a less anxiety-ridden place, and that's already some. Facebook took away Trump's accounts from him was not a great sign of courage, right? For 3 years, 11 months, and 2 weeks, they enabled him. They gave him those accounts. The day where the Senate, the US Senate, turned to a majority, Democratic majority, and therefore every single committee in Congress who was supposed to do oversight of social media platforms was shifting to the Democrats. Their Twitter and Facebook took away the 2 accounts to Trump. So it's not a great sign of courage. It was kind of, more opportunistic than else. And I think that the real answer to your question is what they did is clearly a sign that those platforms, and I mentioned Twitter and Facebook, but there are many others, are not neutral platforms as they pretend. They're actually publishers. They can decide who has a voice and who hasn't, and what kind of voice, in addition to deciding what we can see and what we can't see and what we can read and what we can't read. And therefore, they should be held accountable like every other publisher for what's published on their system. And there we should have a whole discussion here about freedom of speech and about who controls that freedom, whether it's the law or whether it's big corporations that have captured the public space. And that's a very important discussion, but we don't really have the time for all that. So let me just point out two anecdotes or two specific things about the 6th of January that were really interesting to me. When that day, hundreds of people stormed the US Capitol in Washington, D.C., if you look at the images of the day, first of all, there are many images. And if you look at the images, you will realize that a vast majority of those who were entering the Capitol were taking pictures and they were filming. And often they were kind of live streaming. It was as if what they were really doing was not attacking the seat of Congress, but it was kind of producing content for their social media accounts. I had the impression that we were watching a sort of augmented reality game, or alternate reality game, where the physical space was just the context for creating photos and videos to send back to the real world of social media, where those groups kind of seem to be spending a lot of time and organizing themselves. So that's one of the things that was striking to me. There is a blurring of reality and cyberspace here that is still difficult to analyze, but clearly it's playing a big role in the way people experience politics today. And then the second point is about Parler. You may have heard of that other app called Parler, where it's a similar thing to Twitter, but a lot of users that were whose accounts were closed on Twitter, they kind of migrated to Parler. So it started to be a sort of app heavily used by right-wing people and leaders in the US. And it was deleted from the App Store by Apple. It was deleted from the Android Store by Google because it carried content that incited violence. And according to Apple and Google, that was not acceptable. Funnily enough, just a few days later, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, gave a speech where he basically accused Facebook of hosting violent incitement. But he did not go all the way to delete Facebook from the App Store, right? So why Parler, yes, and Facebook not? Of course, because Parler is small and Facebook is big and it's powerful. But here is a question that I just throw on the table for as a provocation. What would happen if Apple was to delete the Facebook app from the App Store and therefore not make it accessible to every iPhone user in the world? I think that that's an interesting question about the real seat of power today.
Interesting. So we have been talking about the Trump. Let's speak about the future. Let's speak about the new Biden administration. What do you expect from them? And taking account that they had also a first crisis in communication this week at the White House. So how do you see the Biden administration and in terms of the trends for the future and the new relationships between Europe and the USA and USA and the rest of the world?
Yeah.
Oh, I think we have a little problem on the internet. Bruno?
Yeah. I think there's maybe a problem on the line, but let's hope that you can hear me correctly. So I think there's a lot of expectation right now on the Biden-Harris administration, really a lot. Yeah, there is a lot of expectation on the Biden-Harris administration, right? After 4 years of essential vacuum of policy and of leadership, then it's kind of normal. So let me just mention maybe two things. The first big expectation is that they will find ways to restore the role of government, the real role of government, which is to be a set of institutions and agreements by which society lives together peacefully, makes sure no one is left behind, protects the common good, propels itself forward towards the common future. And all these things have kind of broken down over the last couple of decades in the US and across the West. But then Biden-Harris also need to reposition the US as a trustworthy partner in global affairs. You know, the new Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, said that the world does not organize by itself. And that's actually an evidence, but it needs to be said. The world can function only if we organize it. And the US over the last 4 years has totally, has kind of been absent from this effort to organizing the world. So reversing bad policies, as Biden has been doing in the last few weeks through a lot of executive orders, and so is a good thing, but regaining trust and re-becoming that trustworthy partner is going to take more than that, I think. And there's definitely a big expectation on the shoulders of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Great. So coming back to Europe, our continent, how do you see the impact of Brexit for UK and for the Europe? And I think that there is one of the TED conference taking place in UK in the past, so I don't know if it's also affects you in the next years. Are you changing the place, or you will be still located in UK?
Yeah, we have actually conferences that travel all around, but we do have one coming up this October in the UK. But to answer your question about the EU and Brexit, first of all, I want to say something that maybe is not so self-evident or generally accepted in Catalonia, or in Spain, and is this: the European Union is one of the most advanced political and social construct ever created. Right? It's a unique case. It is a unique case of countries and nations coming together and giving up willingly some of their sovereignty for the sake of the common good. And something like this had never happened before in the history of humankind. It's also, by the way, an instrument of the European Union that has kept Europe at peace for a very long stretch of time, 70 years. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but it's true. And I think we should celebrate these things. We should celebrate the achievements of the European Union. Although, of course, the European Union is flawed. It has a lot of problems, like every institutional setup, because institutions are the result of negotiations among people and group and the nations, and therefore they are endlessly perfectible. They can always be better, and they need to be constantly made better. Now, about Brexit, I have to say that back in 2016, the yes to Brexit surprised me. And mostly is because the UK already had some of the most favorable terms in terms of participating in the EU. And over the years, they had negotiated exceptions about a lot of different things, anything from not being part of the euro and Schengen and plenty of other aspects. But then the Brits decided to go. The vote was kind of 50-50 plus, so it was a thin margin, but they decided to go. And I think that there were a lot of misplaced sense of kind of, let's take back control, let's take back our sovereignty. And there was also a lot of illusion among elites of becoming this gigantic low tax place, sort of tax-free portal, sort of Monte Carlo, the size of a big nation. And I don't think that that's going to happen. I think Britain is going to pay a steep price for giving up participating in the European bloc, particularly right now when we are seeing a redistribution of the blocks around in terms of geopolitics. We're US, China, and the EU, three big super blocks, each one with a very different institutional setup, very different approach to power. So how is tiny Britain gonna play in that context by itself? I don't know.
Okay, so we've been talking about Biden, Trump, Brexit, but if we go back to the real life, for people now in Spain and in Europe, the big issue is COVID, and we're still in the middle of the third wave. The vaccination campaign is not yet finished. Tonight,
it's barely started. It's barely started.
Yes, tonight the idea is to have Bruno with us in Barcelona because of the quarantine between that Switzerland government has put with Spain. You couldn't travel, so thinking about medium and long term, what are the three main challenges that you think of the post-COVID world? What will happen once the COVID will end up?
Yeah, hard question. We don't really know, right? But let me just throw a few thoughts on the table. First, no country did everything right? Some did well in controlling the first wave, and they're now doing poorly with vaccine rollout. Some did exactly the opposite, and so on. So no country had the perfect formula. A few, like Taiwan, did very well, but everywhere there were problems, big and small. Secondly, I think we should also say that the fact that we have already several vaccines that work within 1 year is a sort of triumph of scientific collaboration and public-private partnership, right? It's the point where science gets as close as possible to being something magical. And I think we needed to acknowledge that, and we need to acknowledge and also know that the vaccines actually do work. At least they do work as well, at least as the previous vaccines we knew, even if the time for creating them has been shorter. So the three challenges of the post-COVID, I think the first one is to restart, simply to restart after 1 year of essentially suspension of life and of commerce and of travel and so on. But the second one is to restart differently, because it's clear that the notion of just going back to normal, meaning the normal that was before the pandemic, it's a bit of an absurd notion, right? The normal is what brought us here, in a way, and so this pandemic should also be an alert to help us push us to prepare for the next crisis, and to make everything possible to avoid that crisis. Prepare for it if it comes, but make everything possible to avoid it. And there is, of course, a potential for another pandemic, and there is, of course, another crisis we already know about, and that's climate change, right? Which is all around us. We see signs every day. Just today in Texas, for example, with the crazy snow and low temperatures. And then the third one, I think, is that we need to start paying attention to what is probably the most underestimated impact of these 12 months of pandemic, which is not healthcare and is not the economy. It is the psychological impact, the mental impact on people, on individuals, and on society. We have lived through a year of uncertainty, anxiety, disruption, lack of socializing, lack of contact, lack of touch, interactions mostly through screens. And all that is not just going to go away one morning, right? All that is going to have profound implications, very different for the young people and for adults, very different for those who have been able to work from home and those who have lost their job, and so on, but profound social and individual implications. So let me quote maybe one author that I've been reading recently. There is a German philosopher called Hartmut Rosa. I don't know whether he's translated in Spanish, but he's written a book recently about the world as we know becoming unavailable to us. So the idea that over the last decades, we have created this world that was open to all our desires, in an unlimited way, in a permanent way. You could just, get everything and have infinite choice. And then the pandemic and the lockdowns have suddenly taken that away, creating anxiety and frustration, a new sense that the world is psychological and mental implications of what does it mean of having the world we were living in taken away from us so suddenly.
Great. So something that TED was important, but maybe people didn't want to listen to Bill Gates in a TED talk when 5 years ago he predicted that the pandemic will take place, and nobody believed him. And it was Bill Gates, which is a Bill Gates Foundation, and he is somebody who is quite a well-informed person. So recently he said that a pandemic will repeat in the future. So you explained about the challenge, but also or should we prevent the new pandemics? Because I think this morning they were talking about Ebola virus starting again in Africa into place. So it means that we have been learning, but what should we do to prevent in the future and to do? Yeah. Maybe you mentioned before about Asia and technology. Should we use more technology and big data to fight the new pandemics as the Asian countries did? Just open question.
Yeah, so on Bill Gates first, I know that talk you're referring to is a talk he gave in 2015 at a TED conference. And I know it well because I actually hosted that session where he spoke and worked with him on preparing the talk. And he did not predict the pandemic. I know there is kind of, a sort of crazy conspiracy theories going around saying Bill Gates knew, here is the talk that shows it, so clearly he is behind it to make money, whatever. This is just nonsense, right? He did not predict the pandemic. He warned us about the possibility of a pandemic, and he didn't do that because he has predictive powers. He did that because he has a great capacity to analyze the available data, the available science, and the available trends. And that's what he saw in the data. And probably that would have been what everyone would have seen by analyzing the data. And clearly was right. The pandemic came and clearly was right. We were not ready, because in the talk, he pointed out that the world was not ready for something like a global pandemic, and he suggested ways to prepare, including investing in preparing vaccines, and including monitoring networks to spot the beginning of pandemic very, very fast, and international cooperation, etc. Now, yes, there are probably going to be other pandemics in the future, because we keep aggressing nature and eliminating every buffer, every distance between human settlements and nature. And there are many potential pathogens out there in nature, thousands of them, literally. And the more we push against nature, the more we create a sort of hostile context where pathogens may emerge and may jump to humans. But then, another reason why this pandemic was so became so big is that in the last 15, 20, 25 years, we have worked relentlessly to cut out every slack, every redundancy, every stock from our system, and particularly our economic system. The reason why at the beginning of last year, when COVID hit, in many places there were almost no masks. There was almost no hand sanitizer, almost no personal protective equipment for healthcare workers. It's not because we don't know how to produce them. It's not because they are too expensive, right? It is because we have pursued this notion that keeping a stock of things in reserve as a backup is economically inefficient. That producing locally instead of outsourcing production at the other end of the world is economically inefficient. Many people have actually died in the early days of the pandemic because of this obsession we have with this displaced notion of economic efficiency. Now, the Asian countries and technology. Some countries like Taiwan, for example, did use technology brilliantly to fight back the pandemic, right? But technology is not the only answer. And indeed, even Taiwan used technology and policy and community engagement and even humor, right? There was the prime minister going on social media with humorous responses to conspiracy theories, for example, or to the anti-vaccine people and so. And indeed, technology is not the only answer, as shown, for example, by many European countries creating contact tracing applications that didn't really work very well. So we need more. And I think that we need two key things. We need clear and consistent communication and sharing of information, and then trust in the people in charge, independently whether they are politicians or CEOs or epidemiologists, right? And those two things, of course, are linked. If communication becomes confusing, if the restrictions that are imposed on people are nonsensical, they are contradictory, why can I do this if I cannot do that? If people's anxieties are not taken into account, then trust gets eroded. And so trust plays a big role in the way, as a society, we can fight back a pandemic.
Yes, you're right. And I think that also regarding Asia, there is also a question of philosophy of life and the philosophy of the person, the society, and the individualist versus collective. So there are some values which is also not only technology. You mentioned a lot of time climate change, climate urgency. So let's switch about this big issue. Climate urgency and SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals promoted by the UN. From TED, and because you're leading the Countdown initiative, how do you explain, what role do ideas play in this challenge, and what can we do from a platform like TED to help to fight against climate urgency?
Maybe the best way to look at this is this. There are a couple of numbers we all should know. The one is 55 billion. 55 billion is the quantity of tons of greenhouse gas that we send up into the atmosphere every year. They do not disperse. They go up, they stay there, they accumulate, they warm up the planet, and that's why we feel all these effects on the changing climate, right? Hurricane floods, heat waves, fires, snowstorms, melting ice, and so on. The second number is 1/2. So half of the CO2 that's today in the atmosphere we sent it up there during 250 years. The other half during the last 30 years. And so that curve has been accelerating in an incredible way. And to confront the crisis, we don't only need to slow down that progression, we actually need to curb it down to literally zero in the next 30 years. By 2050, we should actually be at zero carbon emissions, CO2 equivalent emissions. And that is a gigantic ask. It's a gigantic task. It means rethinking the way we literally do everything and make everything zero carbon, how we move, how we grow our food, how we produce things, how we distribute things, how we power our houses and our offices and factories, and so on. And there isn't a single solution. We need all the solutions. We need the political, the economic, the technological, the scientific, the social solutions. So at TED, we asked ourselves the question, what can we do 2 years ago to contribute to this? And we launched this initiative called TED Countdown. The name comes from, it's a countdown to 2030, which is the goal the international community has given itself for cutting emissions by half. And the funny thing is that we know what we have to do, and we have many of the technologies already, but we need also to develop others quickly. And what we want to do at TED is essentially use our tools, which are the tools of storytelling and digital platforms and community engagement, to try to select and disseminate and accelerate ideas that have a positive impact and can be solutions to the climate crisis. Because we think there is a pathway to a net zero future, to a beautiful, rich, happy, clean, net zero, zero carbon future. But again, it needs all the possible solutions we can get.
Yes, and talking about sustainable development and tourism, because in fact now with the lockdown, a lot of people couldn't, mobility, if you mean, because one of the big impact to fight the COVID has been to stay at home, no? But people after 1 year, they're dreaming to leave their city or to come back to travel again. I am sure that you're dreaming to come to Barcelona, and a lot of people here will dream to go to the Swiss mountains. So I mean, how do we make this more sustainable tourism, and what would be the challenge to get the SDGs and same time this freedom of mobility that in Europe it's important?
Yes, Pedro, I am going to do something that one should never do in these calls. I need to ask you to wait for 20 seconds, and I'm going to go off camera because my computer is about to die. The battery is going down. Since we're talking about energy and clean energy, here it is. So I'm going to be back in 20 seconds. Apologize.
No problem. El directo.
And here we go.
That's good. Good news.
Sorry for that. So your question was about tourism.
Tourism mobility. I mean,
yes. When can we resume traveling and meeting, right? I sense a lot of people that really want to go back to travel. They just can't wait to go back and jump on a plane, right, or on a train. And then I know a lot of others who are actually reassessing their habits about traveling. Should I travel as much as before? Should I have a more purposeful approach to travel and so on? But I suspect that tourism is going to be probably one of the last sectors to really come back from the current disruption. First of all, because there's not going to be a hard stop on the pandemic, despite the vaccines, right? It's not like suddenly we're going to wake up on Monday morning and the pandemic is going to be gone. It's going to be with us. The virus is going to be with us for a long time in small and big waves. And that means there are going to be disruptions of travel, because the best way to control the virus is actually to avoid people traveling, because the virus travels with people. So I suspect that tourism will take a moment to come back.
Great. So I will ask a last question about technology, and after I will open the debate to the audience. I remind people who are following on streaming, they can also ask questions. We will ask first the people who are here in CASA SEAT, but also we will take questions from people following us on streaming. So we have been talking about COVID, we have been talking about policy, politics, economy. Let's talk about technology, which is one of your passions. You have been a pioneer of digital. I'm thinking about the company Tynet that you created. So today's internet look like the free and democratic internet that you imagine in its beginning? Or what do you?
No, it doesn't. It definitely doesn't, right? So there was a time in the 90s where many, including me, thought that the internet would and the web would become essentially this force for freedom, giving voice to those who don't have voice, distributing power, opening opportunities, equalizing, and so on. And for a while, that actually happened. There was a period where the internet was something like that. But then the commercial logic took over. And so today we have an internet that's dominated by large centralized corporations, that extract our experiences, extract data about our daily private and professional experiences, and they appropriate them because the data that describe you and describe me don't belong to you and me. They belong to Facebook or to Google or whoever. And then they transform them into a source of commercial gain for them, and into a source of a sort of cognitive cage for us, where we are constantly prisoners of this, algorithms pushing out stuff to us that kind of tries to repeat and reinforce what we already know and what we have used before, and so on. Of course, I'm disappointed about the situation. I remember writing in the 90s a series of articles about the need for a different kind of regulation framework, law framework for the web, so I kind of tried to push back on that, but I didn't really see the size and the scope that this thing would take. So I think the internet is still by and large a force for good, but some part of them are clearly a net negative for society today, particularly social media platforms.
Okay, so let's open the discussion with the audience. I have a lot of lights, so it's difficult for me, but I think that my colleague has a micro. I already questioned from...
But we start with the people that are here.
Okay, so I will start a question from internet, and after I will ask the people. Carlota will have the micro, and for COVID reasons, she will keep the micro. You have to speak, but with a micro on Carlota. So I don't see where is Carlota, but yes. Should we start with the public here?
Yeah, no,
yes. Yeah. So I will ask people to introduce your name and make a short question, direct question, so we can have as many as questions that Bruno can answer.
Any hands?
Nobody? Yes? A volunteer? It's always too difficult to have the first one to break the ice.
Thanks. Hello, my name is Victor. I would like to ask you about what do you feel about democracy today? Because my feeling is that it's threatened. The quality of democracy is decreasing all over the places because of polarization of the society and because of the deep state and the power of the corporations. So what do you think about?
Yeah, hi, Victor. I think you're right. I think democracy is under threat. Democracy is not something that's a given, right? Democracy is something that requires working on it every day and defending and developing it, and so. And it has been kind of chipped away at, or kind of diminished over several decades now by different forces that kind of all converge. Even before the polarization that we know now, there were other forces that were that have contributed to diminish the democratic setup. For example, the fact that for about 30 or 40 years now, in a lot of places, but especially in the United States and the United Kingdom, and then by reflection, like mirroring that across Europe, we keep pushing against the state. We keep trying to diminish the state, make it smaller, make it less capable, with the excuse that governments should be run like businesses, and that public administrations are just bureaucracies and so on. But by diminishing the capacity of the state, we end up diminishing its capacity to defend and be a player in securing democracy, and also in acting on things like the pandemic, for example, where clearly many states have shown that they don't have enough resources and capacity internally. Then to this, other forces have come in. Even before social media, we had 24 hours news channels with, by the logic of their existence and the need to fill 24 hours of news, they kind of pumped up political scandal after political scandal. And then we've had the internet, and then social media with its polarizing algorithms and so on. So clearly we are not in a great place. There was a piece of research published recently that said that something like 14 or 18% of people in the world live in a democracy today. Although we in Europe have the sense that democracy is kind of the dominant model, is actually not. Capitalism is the dominant model, but democracy is actually only real in a minority of places.
Thank you, Victor. Another question? Yes.
Raise your hand.
In the first row.
Perdón que no te veía. Sorry. We have to.
Well, first of all, congratulations of your work. I think tech talks are a big part of what we understand of the breakthrough and innovative thinking. I'm a big fan.
Thank you.
My question is regarding the future of Europe within this geopolitical situation where the power is moving towards the east. We have a China that is catching up with the USA, potentially 2027. It will overpass USA as a first world economy. And USA is also very much divided and polarized. So what do you think is the future of Europe within this context in which we're trying to find our spot in this complicated puzzle, yeah?
It's definitely a difficult question because there are so many things that are unknown in the trajectory of all of the players, right? Clearly, for example, if you take the Western Alliance, the United States and Europe, the Atlantic Alliance, one thing that seems evident today is there are many things on which the two could still be aligned. We have interests in common, climate change and migration and other things. But when it comes to the priority in international politics, the priority of the US is not Europe, is not NATO, is actually China, right? And the priority of Europe is actually the southern rim of the Mediterranean, is Turkey and the Middle East and Africa and the migration and these things. And so already that tells you how different the international approach of the two regions is going to be. Many people think that at some point Europe will have to choose between being aligned with the US and being aligned with China. Maybe not. Maybe not. And the reason why not is this. If you look at these three blocks from the perspective of power, and what you realize is that in China, the real place of power resides with the state and the Communist Party. In the US, the real place of power resides essentially with the economy, with big corporations and with economic interests that buy their way into the political process and so. In Europe, power is still kind of distributed. In some way, it still belongs to people, country by country, but at a European level, somehow it belongs to the European bureaucracy, to a technocratic process that decides regulations, that try to connect and convince everybody to go along with a common approach and so on. So we have three essentially big blocks that seem to be developing very differently in terms of the way they interpret power in the interest of their population and of their institutions. Where that is going to lead, I don't know. I don't think it's going to lead to generalized chaos. I think it's probably going to lead, if we have enough wisdom and enough diplomatic capacity, in a way to function together as three blocks and leverage the common points, the interest for trade, for climate, and so on. These things that we need to fix together, and nobody can fix them independently. But then there's going to be also places of tension, for sure.
Thank you. Another question? Yes.
Try to be as quick as I can.
Hello, I'm Diana. I've heard you talking about a crisis of trust, because people actually are stopping to trust both institutions and media. And I think this is due also to the media action, and people feel disconnected both from their governments and what is actually the storytelling they've been told through the TV, internet, whatever is media. So is there any way that we can solve this as citizens and, I don't know, professionals?
Yeah, you're totally right. And as individuals, we cannot do much except try to not contribute to make things worse. And there are some basic things there. For example, don't share on Facebook or Twitter or WhatsApp something that you have not read. So many people just forward something because they see the headline and they get angry about the headline or happy about the headline and they share it. And very often a headline doesn't actually represent what's in the article, right? And so, but that's how rumors, that's how conspiracies go around, that's how fake information goes around. This is just a tiny example. So we need to take our part of responsibility, not making things worse, particularly in terms of information, because of course, at the basis of trust, there is information, a specific kind of information, the information that's real, that's facts-based, and which reflects what you are going to do. I mentioned before how better we all breathe since Trump doesn't have Twitter anymore, right? The new prime minister of Italy, Mario Draghi, just gave a speech, which was his request for support in Parliament, and he said something very interesting. He said, "We need to talk only when you have something to say that relates to facts." We just had an interview with John Kerry, the new US envoy for climate, and he said something exactly similar. We need to promise only the things that we know we are going to do. What are we ready to do? We need to say that, and we need to say only the things that we are really ready to do. So part of reestablishing trust is actually finding this link, reconnecting what we say and what we do, the words and the facts. And that's where everything, I think, has broken up. There is no real link between those two things anymore. The facts get broken down into rumors and conspiracies and ideology, and what we do very often doesn't match anything of that, and it goes in a completely different direction. So I think that that's definitely something we need to fight for.
Thank you. Another question? I don't see. Okay, so I will read a question that I received from my colleagues. One is by Gina, asking about talking about feminism and female empowerment is also a big trend. As a technology expert and trend seeker, how do you think feminism is going to affect technology in the future?
Oh, wow. I think that the main point about that is that technological development has always been essentially gendered. It has been led by men. Technology has been mostly designed by men with men in mind. And of course, that's kind of inevitable when decisions about the functioning and the interface and logic of software and hardware are mostly taken by men in their 20s and 30s, all clustered in Silicon Valley or in a couple of other regions in the world, all with similar backgrounds, mostly engineering. So it's inevitable that you end up with a technology that's totally skewed. So I think the real thing that we need to, the knot that we need to undo is the gendered mechanisms and thinking that influence the way technology is designed and developed. How can we break that up and make sure that technology is designed for everybody?
Great.
We have another question.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so
yes.
My name is Miriam. Hi. So earlier on you commented about Trump's Twitter being, banned. And my question is, don't you think Twitter, who's such a big company, is like jeopardizing one of the main points of the American Constitution, which is the freedom of speech. Yeah, I would like to hear your thoughts about that.
Yes, the American Constitution protects freedom of speech when it comes from the state taking away your freedom of speech, right? It does not protect freedom of speech when it comes to a commercial entity taking it away. You use Twitter, and so you know what you're using because you signed that 75 pages document that you don't read, and that says, there's a button that says, I agree. And in there, essentially, you give yourself fully to Twitter. You give Twitter the capacity to gather your data, keep your data, and also to silence you. There are rules, specific rules in there that says, if you do this, we're going to take away your account. And there is no constitution protecting you for that because Twitter is not the government. Twitter is a private commercial corporation. So they have all the right to silence you, to take away the service that they're given to you. Is the same way as if the owner of a restaurant doesn't allow you into the restaurant because you are walking in naked. Exactly the same thing, right? It contravenes the policy of that restaurant. And here, you contravene the policy of Twitter. Now, the problem with this is that Twitter, like Facebook, have become so pervasive in our political discourse that they have basically completely absorbed the public space, absorbed public debate, absorbed the public square. And so we have this impression that they are the public space, but they are not, right? They are the space for debate, but they are not. They remain private corporations. And that's why there is no constitution that actually protects you against that being taken away. So I think the problem is really about how, why have we left the public sphere, the sphere where public debate happens, be taken over and controlled by private entities that don't have a public interest goal, but they have a revenue and profit goal. And how can we walk that back? I don't think that breaking them up is the solution. I think that regulating them heavily is the solution.
Thank you. Another one. Okay, in case I have two questions from internet who came. Two are related to TED, and one is more general. I will start by the two questions related to TED, and after we finish with a question of Matthias.
Sure.
The two questions regarding TED is, the moderators say that the Pope Francisco spoke at TED. How does it go after inviting the Pope to give a talk? So tell us a little bit about the story. And the second question related to TED is, what is the present and future of TED? It's from Carlota. Are you planning any exciting events, or there is anything that you can secretly share with us? Secretly, you have signed that.
It stays in the room. It stays in the room.
Exactly.
So Pope Francis, he gave two talks at TED. One in 2017, one in 2020, last October, right? And the first time I approached the Vatican to ask whether he would give a talk, I think it's fair to say that no one at the Vatican knew what TED was. So I had to do a lot of explaining and a lot of convincing. And fortunately, I could count on some people who were well introduced to the Vatican and knew TED, and they could explain and they could whisper and so on. So it took almost a year to actually get to the point where, one morning I received an SMS message, a text message from one of my contacts at the Vatican say, the Pope said yes, literally said just that, the Pope said yes. And then you enter into the process of, okay, now what is he gonna say? How do we film that? And how do we produce the talk and so on? So that was the first one. So the second one was easier because I didn't have to have any convincing to do anymore. And it was last October when we had this big initiative about the launch of the Climate Countdown initiative. And the Pope, as you know, 5 years ago wrote an encyclical letter, meaning a book about climate called Laudato Si. And then just in the days before the event has published another book on global fraternity called Fratelli Tutti. And so out of those books, we basically created the second talk. But I'm really, thankful and grateful to Pope Francis for doing that, because he has never spoken at any conference like TED before, and no Pope has ever spoken at any conference like TED before. In terms of whether we have something secret that we're planning, I don't know whether it's secret or not, but last year we did not have a single physical official TED conference. Essentially what we do is we gather people and we put someone on stage telling a story to those people. And that activity for most of last year in most of the countries where we operate as TED, the central organization, that activity was technically illegal, which is even funny to say that your activity is kind of technically illegal. So we could not have any physical conference. So we did a lot of things digitally. Unfortunately, we have a big digital platform and a big digital audience and digital community. This year, we have some hopes to be able to have a conference in August in California and one in October in Scotland. But we are preparing for the plan A, which is to have the conferences. The second one is the one about climate. The first one is our annual event. We are preparing a plan B, which is to have a potential hybrid version with some people there and some people remotely. And we're preparing a plan C, which is to go again all digital in case the pandemic makes it impossible to gather. Now, the word hybrid is a bit bizarre. I prefer to talk about fluid rather than hybrid, right? It's not just two separate pieces. It's two pieces that are supposed to, by design, to really interact and integrate into one single event, although some people are there physically and some others may not.
It's a little bit, you're experimenting tonight with us, no? The hybrid format. Oh, I think there is a bad connection. Bruno?
There was a moment of silence, Pedro. Yeah. So if you said something, please.
No, I say that tonight we're doing you're experimenting with us tonight with this hybrid format.
Yeah, now I hear you well. Yeah, now I hear you well. Yeah.
Okay, so last question, and it's about it's from Matthias, and I think it's to give a little of optimistic way. How optimistic are you that we will emerge from the pandemic stronger in long term?
I am rather optimistic and I'm hopeful that we will have learned the lessons from this pandemic, and that we understand that going back to before is not the right thing to do. That's what brought us here, and so we need to really rethink a little bit we need to rethink profoundly a lot of things we do. But the long term is really going to be determined by how we confront the issue of climate change. Climate change is real. There is an absolute consensus among scientists. Don't believe those who say, no, there is a debate. There is no debate. When there is 99.9% on one side and 0.1% on the other, there is no debate, right? It's real, it's here, we see it everywhere. It's caused by us, by human activity, and we need to confront it. And this decade starts this year. The 2020 to 2030 is the decisive decade that will essentially define how the world is going to evolve literally in the next century, how the world of our children and grandchildren is going to look like. And we definitely don't want the children and grandchildren to look back and say, what were they thinking, right? So let's not only think, but let's act.
So thank you very much, Bruno. Grazie mille. Un applauso. No?
Thank you all. Thank you.
On behalf of CASA SEAT, we would like to invite you next year to do a follow-up session in live. We hope so.
We definitely hope so. Of course, absolutely. Invitation accepted.
And just for your information, Bruno, here in CASA SEAT, we will start a TED Talk next month. We will do 3 TED Talks. The first one will be next month in March. So as you can see, we will be in contact indirectly with your colleagues of TEDx. Sorry, TEDx Talk. Sorry, no, not TED Talk. TEDx Talk, which is another format, but also launched by your organization. So thank you very much. See you soon and stay safe.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Enjoy the evening. Stay safe. Bye bye. Take care.
Bye bye.
Thank you.